The grand hall of the Intergalactic Council was a sight to behold. The colossal chamber, situated at the heart of the great nebula, shimmered with light from distant stars, each of the 12 species seated in perfect order, awaiting the arrival of the alien Empress. This was no ordinary meeting. This was an event that commanded the attention of the entire galaxy. Delegates from worlds far and wide had gathered, each one with a singular purpose: to listen, to respect, and to bow before the figure who held the fate of billions in her hands. The Empress was revered, not just as a leader, but as a symbol of power. Her very name had brought civilizations to their knees. There were whispers in every corner of the galaxy, legends spoken of her unmatched strength, intelligence, and unyielding will. To stand in her presence was a privilege, a moment of history itself. As the doors to the council hall swung open, the room fell into complete silence. The great throne that sat at the far end of the hall was vacant, but its occupant was near. The atmosphere thickened, the air charged with the anticipation of her arrival. Every single delegate, from the smallest of the Kaltorian species to the towering Draxians, rose to their feet, their eyes fixed on the entryway. But there was one exception. Jack Harrison, the lone human representative of Earth, remained seated. The room seemed to freeze. A collective gasp echoed through the hall as every eye turned to Jack. It wasn't as though he was unaware of the customs. He had been to countless council meetings before, representing Earth in their affairs. He had stood like everyone else, paying his respects just as every other species did. But today, he chose to remain seated. His posture was casual, one hand resting on the armrest of his chair, the other loosely clasped in his lap. His expression was calm, almost indifferent, as though he had done nothing out of the ordinary. The murmurs started almost immediately, low and unintelligible at first, like a wave passing through the crowd. Delegates exchanged glances, some visibly irritated, others intrigued. No one could understand why Jack, a human of all species, would defy the norms of the Galactic Council. He was a soldier, a representative, someone who had earned his seat at the table. He knew the rules, knew how things worked. Yet, there he was, not standing. It was only moments before the Empress entered the room, her presence radiating an otherworldly calm. She was tall and regal, her features flawless, her movements graceful. Her eyes, glowing with the faintest trace of violet, scanned the room as she walked slowly toward her throne. The delegates stood straighter, each of them eager to catch a glimpse of Her Majesty. As the Empress walked past the delegates, her gaze, however, didn't linger on any of them. It wasn't their presence that she sought, it was Jack's. Her eyes locked onto him almost immediately, and the world around them seemed to slow. Jack Harrison remained seated, his gaze unwavering, meeting hers with a calmness that could rival the vastness of space itself. A shiver ran through the room. There was an unspoken understanding. Something had just shifted. The Empress stopped in her tracks, her regal steps faltering for only a moment as she studied Jack. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a brief instant it seemed as though time itself had stopped. "Jack Harrison," the Empress said, her voice a soft hum, but it carried through the room with the weight of 100 thunderclaps. Her words were not just a greeting, they were an invitation for an answer, for an explanation. Jack slowly stood, his movements deliberate, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. His face remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, something the Empress hadn't expected to see in a human. He stepped forward, and the rest of the council fell into an even more stunned silence. "I mean no disrespect, Your Excellency," Jack said, his voice carrying through the vast hall. His words were clear and confident, though his tone didn't contain the usual reverence. "I simply wanted to prove a point." The Empress raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "A point?" she asked, her voice laced with both authority and intrigue. Jack nodded, his expression not changing. "The universe, as vast as it is, has created certain expectations of the way things should be."
"But I don't follow those expectations," I follow my own code.
Today, I wanted to challenge the idea that respect can only be shown through submission. His words were deliberate, each one chosen with care. He paused, letting the weight of his statement settle into the room. Standing isn't the only way to show respect. Sometimes, standing can be a sign of obedience. And I refuse to obey simply because the system says I should. The Empress's gaze softened, though no less intense. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. The room remained completely still, as if the entire galaxy itself was waiting for her response. No one dared to breathe. "You are a curious human," the Empress said after a long pause, "and a brave one." She took a step closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. "But tell me, Jack Harrison, do you believe you are the first to challenge me?" Her tone wasn't threatening, but it was laced with an unmistakable authority. She had faced rebellion before, but something about Jack's defiance was different. Jack met her gaze, unwavering.
"No, Your Excellency."
"I'm not the first, but I hope to be the last. To show that we, humans, aren't just subjects to be ruled. We have a place in this galaxy, and I intend to make sure we're not forgotten." The Empress stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, and Jack felt the weight of her scrutiny pressing down on him. But then, a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but one of recognition. She saw something in Jack that others didn't, a spark of defiance that ran deeper than mere arrogance. "I see," she said softly, her voice now carrying the weight of something more personal. "Your courage is not lost on me. But know this, Jack Harrison," she added, her tone taking on a more serious note. "Challenging me has consequences. You have just changed the course of history. The question is, what will you do with it?" Before Jack could respond, the Empress turned away, making her way to her throne. The entire room exhaled collectively, as though a storm had just passed. The murmurs began again, though now they were filled with curiosity, excitement, and even a little fear. What had just transpired between the Empress and the human? What did it mean for the future? Jack remained standing, his expression still calm, though his heart raced. He had made his point. But the battle was far from over. What he had done today was only the beginning. He had just opened a door that neither the Empress nor the galaxy was ready to walk through, and he intended to walk it no matter the cost. The council session continued, but Jack's mind was far away, already thinking ahead. What would happen next? Would the Empress show him mercy, or would she turn on him for his audacity? One thing was certain: the game had changed, and Jack Harrison, the human who refused to stand, had just begun to rewrite the rules. The silence that hung in the air after the Empress left Jack standing was almost suffocating. Every eye in the room was now fixed on him, every delegate wondering what had just transpired between the human and the most powerful being in the galaxy. The whispers started slowly, gradually rising in intensity, as the delegates tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. It wasn't often that someone stood before the Empress without fear, let alone challenged her directly. Jack, however, was not interested in the hushed conversations or the staring eyes of the council. His mind was elsewhere, lost in the moment he had shared with the Empress. There was a deep sense of unease within him, but it wasn't about what had just happened. It was the weight of what would happen next. He had made his point, but what would the Empress do with it? What consequences would follow? As the council session resumed, Jack could feel the tension around him, the quiet anticipation that seemed to follow every word he spoke. He wasn't naive. He knew that what he had done wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a challenge that had shaken the very core of the galaxy's power structure. But Jack wasn't here to play the part of the obedient representative. He was here to make sure Earth wasn't lost in the chaos of galactic politics. The Empress was not one to easily forget. Her eyes never wavered from him when they locked earlier. Jack had seen that look before, in the faces of soldiers who realized they had made a fatal mistake. But this wasn't the same. The Empress was calculating, her mind always 2 steps ahead. She had taken his challenge in stride. But Jack knew that this wouldn't go unnoticed. The galaxy wasn't ready for a change like this. The established order was built on submission, on obedience. And Jack had just thrown a wrench in the works. Hours passed as the council went on, each session topic more pressing than the last. But Jack's thoughts were far away, lost in memories of a time long past, memories he had buried deep within himself. They were fragments of a past life, a past that tied him directly to the Empress, a past he had almost forgotten. It had been years since Jack had left Earth, joining the ranks of soldiers that fought in the war that had shaped the galaxy. He had seen many things, fought countless battles, but none had left a mark on him, quite like the day he met the Empress. Jack had been just a recruit then, barely out of training when he was sent on a mission to a distant planet in a far corner of the galaxy. The mission was simple: rescue a group of hostages from an enemy faction. It was supposed to be a routine operation, a quick in-and-out mission, but as soon as he landed on the planet, things went terribly wrong. The enemy forces were more organized than expected, and soon, Jack and his unit found themselves caught in an ambush. The battle raged for hours, and just when it seemed like all hope was lost, something unexpected happened. A ship appeared, descending from the sky with an unmistakable grace. The soldiers who had been fighting turned to watch as the ship landed in the midst of the battlefield. The doors opened, and there she stood, the alien Empress, surrounded by her elite guards. She was calm, almost serene, as she surveyed the chaos around her. In that moment, everything changed. With a single gesture, the Empress ordered the immediate surrender of the enemy forces. Her voice, though soft, carried an unmistakable weight, one that made even the most hardened soldiers freeze in place. Jack had watched, dumbfounded, as the battle ended with the flick of her hand. The hostages were freed, the enemy forces neutralized, and the situation was resolved, without a single shot fired from her side. He had never seen anyone wield such power, such control over a situation. But what truly struck him was the way she looked at him when their eyes met across the battlefield. There was recognition there, something familiar, but it was fleeting, like a memory he couldn't quite grasp. After the mission was completed, Jack had been granted an audience with the Empress. The room was unlike anything he had ever seen. Vast, with walls of shimmering metal that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. The Empress sat on a throne, her presence dominating the room, yet there was a strange calmness in the air. She did not speak for a long time, simply studying Jack as if trying to piece together something that had eluded her. Finally she spoke. Her voice was softer than he had expected, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. "You are not like the others," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "There is something in you that I recognize, something from a time long ago, but I cannot place it." Jack had been taken aback, unsure of how to respond. He had come from Earth, a place known for its chaos and war. He had never felt that he was anything special. But the Empress saw something in him, something he couldn't explain. The conversation that followed had been brief, but it left a lasting impact on Jack. He had left the room with more questions than answers, but one thing remained clear. His path and the Empress's were connected in ways that neither of them fully understood. And now, here they were, years later, in the council chamber, their lives intertwined once again. The moment Jack had challenged her had unlocked something buried deep within both of them, a history they had forgotten, but one that was far from over. As the session continued, Jack's thoughts kept returning to that day. He could still see her face, the way her eyes had studied him, like she was searching for something she had lost. He had always wondered what it was, But now he knew it wasn't just curiosity. The Empress had been searching for a piece of her own past, and Jack had been the key. But Jack couldn't afford to dwell on the past. He had a mission, a responsibility to Earth that was bigger than any personal connection he might have had with the Empress. If his actions today had shaken the galaxy, it was nothing compared to the storm that was coming. There were forces at play that were far more dangerous than a simple defiance of protocol. The galaxy was teetering on the edge of chaos, and if the Empress wasn't careful, it could all come crashing down. The council session finally came to a close, and the delegates began to file out of the room, casting glances at Jack as they passed. His mind was still racing, but there was little he could do until he had the answers he needed. As he stood to leave, a voice called out to him. It was the Empress's voice, soft but commanding. "Jack," she said. Her tone was different now, less regal and more personal. He turned to face her, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that was not just the weight of authority. There was something vulnerable there. Something she had hidden for a long time. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Jack nodded. "I'll be there." He didn't know what the conversation would bring, but he knew one thing. Nothing would be the same after today. The Empress had chosen him once before, and now she was choosing him again. Whether it was fate or something else, Jack Harrison had no idea. But one thing was certain, the game had changed, and he was right in the middle of it. The doors to the chamber closed with a soft thud behind Jack, leaving him alone in the quiet hall with the Empress. He had expected her to summon him for a private conversation after the tension-filled council meeting, but he had not anticipated what came next. There was something about the way she looked at him as he entered her private quarters, something more intense than ever before. Her usual regal composure had been replaced by an almost unspoken urgency. The room was vast and opulent, far more elegant than anything Jack had ever seen. It was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Large windows offered a view of the distant stars, their light casting shimmering reflections on the smooth marble floors. A massive throne, crafted from gleaming metals and encrusted with jewels, sat at the far end of the room. The Empress, however, was not seated upon it. Instead, she paced slowly, her fingers gently grazing the surface of a table that held strange artifacts from across the galaxy. Jack stood still, watching her, unsure of what to say. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, but he knew better than to speak first. The Empress had a way of making those around her feel like they were standing on the edge of something monumental. Finally, she turned to face him. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, bore into his, their intensity leaving him momentarily breathless. The weight of her presence filled the room as she spoke, her voice soft but filled with an undeniable authority. "You've stirred something inside me, Jack Harrison," she said, her tone not accusatory but thoughtful. "I do not know what to make of you. You are unlike any other human I've encountered." She paused, as if trying to find the right words. "Your defiance in the council meeting, it was more than an act of rebellion. It was a challenge, yes, but it was also something else. Something personal." Jack took a step forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression neutral. "I'm just a man, Empress. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was trying to remind you of something you might have forgotten." The Empress studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. "And what would that be?" "That not all humans are here to obey," Jack replied calmly. "We're not all subjugated by the rules of the galaxy. We're not all willing to kneel at the feet of those who claim power."
The Empress seemed to digest his words carefully.
Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment Jack thought he saw something flicker behind them, a glimmer of recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared.
"You are right," she said quietly. But what you do not understand, Jack, is that I do not lead through fear alone.
I lead because I have built an empire that demands respect. It is not just my power that binds the galaxy together. It is the order I have created. Without it, everything would fall into chaos. Jack took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. Then what happens when the order is built on lies, he asked, his voice steady but firm. What happens when the people who gave you that power no longer trust you? The Empress's expression darkened slightly. She took a step forward, her gaze intense. What are you insinuating, human? I'm not insinuating anything, Jack replied. I'm asking a question that should have been asked a long time ago. What happens when the very people who placed you on that throne realize that they've been lied to, that their loyalty has been manipulated, that their fates are being controlled by those who have hidden the truth? The Empress fell silent. Her eyes, once filled with confidence and certainty, now seemed to flicker with doubt. For the first time, Jack saw something unfamiliar in her. A vulnerability. It was fleeting, but it was there. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell her what he had learned, what he had uncovered about the past.
There are forces at play, Empress.
Powers that have been manipulating you for years. People who helped you rise to power, who guided your every move, and who control the very systems that keep the galaxy in order. They fed you lies, and you've been too blind to see it. The Empress's eyes widened, her jaw tightening. This is a lie, she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Who would dare manipulate me? I am the Empress. No one has control over me. Not directly, Jack said, but they've controlled the narrative, the story that's been told about you, the story that you've believed all this time. You were made to believe that you were the rightful ruler, that the galaxy needed you to bring order. But the truth is more complicated. Jack's words seemed to hang in the air for a long moment before the Empress finally spoke again, her voice softer now, as if she were considering everything he had said. You speak of lies, she said, her tone more reflective. But what if the truth is too dangerous to face? What if the galaxy itself cannot survive without the story we have built? What if everything would fall apart if we knew the truth? Jack stepped closer, his voice steady but full of conviction. Then we rebuild. We tear down the lies and start from the beginning. A new order, one based on trust, truth, and mutual respect.
But it can't happen if you keep hiding from the past. You have to face it.
The Empress took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the table before her. I've spent so long trying to keep this empire together. I've done things, horrible things, to maintain peace. And now you tell me it was all for nothing. No, Jack said firmly, not for nothing, but for something better. For something real. I'm not asking you to destroy what you've built. I'm asking you to look at it honestly. And if it's truly built on lies, then we have to change it. For the first time in their conversation, the Empress seemed to break. Her composure faltered, and the weight of Jack's words hit her like a physical blow. The truth she had spent so long avoiding was no longer something she could ignore. The empire she had built, the life she had lived. It all seemed suddenly fragile, as though it could shatter with a single misstep. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. I don't know if I can face everything I've done. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder gently, a gesture of support. You don't have to do it alone. The Empress looked up at him, her expression filled with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something softer, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. I've been alone for so long. I don't know what it feels like to trust anyone. Jack smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Maybe it's time to start. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air between them. It was a moment of reckoning, the beginning of something neither of them fully understood, but both knew was inevitable. The Empress finally nodded, her expression resolute. "You're right. We rebuild, together." The galaxy was on the edge of a precipice, and Jack Harrison could feel it in the air. The alliance he and the Empress had formed was fragile, held together by the smallest thread of trust and the weight of unspoken promises. But it was enough to spark the beginning of something monumental. The day after their conversation, Jack and the Empress stood side by side in the council chamber, the very place where Jack had once defied her. The other delegates were assembled, their eyes on them both, waiting for the next move. Whispers filled the room, but this time, they were not whispers of judgment. They were whispers of curiosity, of speculation. No one knew what would happen next, and the uncertainty rippled through the room like a storm waiting to break. The Empress was no longer the same figure who had walked into the chamber just days ago. The armor of authority that had once surrounded her had been replaced by a more vulnerable, yet more powerful presence. Her eyes no longer held the same coldness. They now carried a flicker of something more human, something raw and unfiltered. And Jack, standing beside her, felt the weight of his own role in this transformation. He had never expected things to change so quickly. He had come to the galaxy with only one goal: to ensure that Earth had a place in the larger galactic landscape. But now, the stakes were far higher. What had started as a personal challenge had turned into a fight for the future of the entire galaxy. Jack knew that the Empress had the power to reshape everything, but the real question was whether she could face the truth and use that power for something greater than herself. The room quieted as the Empress stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the assembled delegates. The silence was heavy, thick with expectation. Jack could feel it in his chest, the way the room held its breath, waiting for the first word. "I stand before you today, not as your Empress," she began, her voice calm yet filled with authority. "I stand before you as someone who has learned the most important lesson of all. The truth cannot be hidden forever. The power I have held for so long is not a gift. It is a responsibility, and it is a responsibility I can no longer shoulder alone." The delegates exchanged looks, their eyes widening in disbelief. No one had ever heard the Empress speak like this. For centuries, she had been a symbol of power and strength, a ruler who demanded respect and submission. But now, she was speaking of change. The air was thick with the realization that something fundamental had shifted.
"I have spent too long building an empire based on lies," the Empress continued. "I have allowed others to control the narrative of my reign, to shape the galaxy in ways that serve their interests, not the interests of the people. I have failed you all, and for that, I am sorry."
The room was silent, stunned by the words that had come from the Empress. Her apology was not a gesture of weakness. It was a declaration of strength. She was acknowledging her mistakes, something no ruler of her stature had ever done before. And as she spoke, Jack could see the respect she had long commanded shifting in a new direction. It was no longer fear. It was understanding. It was the beginning of a different kind of power. Jack stood by her side, his heart racing. He had known that the Empress was capable of great things, but he had never seen her like this, vulnerable yet resolute. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that neither of them fully understood, but both knew was necessary. The Empress turned to Jack, her eyes meeting his.
"I cannot do this alone," she said softly.
"I need your help. I need the help of the people I've wronged, the people who have been cast aside in the pursuit of power." Jack nodded, his voice steady. "You're not alone anymore. We're in this together."
The Empress turned back to the council, her voice stronger now, filled with determination.
"We will begin again. We will rebuild the empire, not with force or manipulation, but with truth and justice.
We will create a galaxy where power is shared, where every species has a voice, and where the mistakes of the past are not forgotten, but learned from. The delegates, once wary and unsure, now looked at each other with a new sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, they were seeing the Empress not as a ruler to be feared, but as a leader who could be trusted. And as they exchanged glances, a quiet murmur began to rise, a murmur of agreement, of a new beginning. But not everyone was ready to embrace this new vision. From the back of the room, a voice spoke up, cutting through the growing murmurs.
"This is madness," the voice said, sharp and cold.
You would throw away centuries of power and stability for some naive dream of equality? The galaxy cannot function without control, without fear. The Empress's eyes narrowed, and Jack instinctively took a step forward, ready for confrontation. But the Empress held up a hand, signaling for him to stay back. She was no longer the Empress who ruled with an iron fist. She was the leader of a new galaxy, one that would rise from the ashes of the old. "You speak of control and fear," the Empress said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "But what you fail to see is that the greatest control is not through fear, it is through unity. We are stronger together than we are apart. And if that means rebuilding everything from the ground up, then so be it." The voice from the back of the room fell silent. The delegate who had spoken out was a powerful figure, a member of one of the most influential species in the galaxy. But in that moment, his words carried less weight than they had before. The room had shifted, and it was clear that the galaxy was not going to stand still while the Empress and Jack led the way forward. The Empress took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the room one last time. "This is the beginning of something new. We will face opposition, but we will not be deterred. The truth will be our foundation, and justice will be our guide." With those final words, she turned and walked toward the massive windows that overlooked the stars. Jack followed, standing beside her as they both looked out at the galaxy, at the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The Empress's voice was soft, almost to herself, but Jack heard it clearly. "This is only the beginning, Jack.
There is much to be done, and it will not be easy."
I know, Jack replied, his voice steady. "But we'll do it together."
The Empress turned to him, her expression softening. For the first time, there was a genuine smile on her lips.
"Yes, together." And so, the first steps of their new path were taken.
They knew it would not be easy. There would be enemies, both within and outside the Empire, who would fight to preserve the old ways. But Jack and the Empress had something far stronger than fear or power. They had truth. And with it, they would rebuild the galaxy, piece by piece, until it was a place where no one was forgotten, and no one was silenced.
The battle ahead was not one for power. It was a battle for the future.
And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt that despite the uncertainty, despite the challenges they would face, there was hope. Real hope. The kind that could change everything. As they stood side by side watching the stars, Jack knew that the galaxy was about to enter a new age, and he would be there, helping to guide it, step by step, alongside the Empress who had finally found the courage to face the truth.